And if I'm truthfully honest with myself and with others, that I, without question, in the past, have let my ideologies cloud my scientific judgment. And I think that that's why it's so important for me to continue on in my own studies, but also in doing these videos.
We have made absolutely no physiological adaptations to eat meat. Meat nor any animal products are required in our diet, and if you look at our lipid metabolism, we are very clearly herbivores. Only herbivorous animals can develop atherosclerosis from eating too much saturated animal fat and cholesterol. Omnivores and carnivores, on the other hand, they can eat as much saturated fat and cholesterol as they want without clogging their arteries.
Good morning, YouTube. Homegrown Big coming at you with another video. What we just heard right there is so commonly used in arguments for why humans should not eat animal products. The argument is that true omnivores and true carnivores never get hardened arteries. And I'm going to take a look at this a little bit more in depth today and see if that's what the data really tells us. So let's begin today by looking at the paper that Richard cited for this information, and it's called 20 Questions on Atherosclerosis by Dr. William Roberts. We see in his highlighted statement, which is the opening statement for this paper, that says atherosclerosis affects only herbivores. Dogs, cats, tigers, and lions can be saturated with fat and cholesterol, and atherosclerotic plaques do not develop. And then he cites 1 and 2 for his own citations in this paper. So let's dig a little bit deeper and look at those citations and see if we can get a larger breadth of information regarding this claim and statement this doctor is making. He cites 2 sources, and one of those sources is a document that he himself wrote. So let's take a quick look at that one. This document he wrote was essentially a letter to the American Journal of Cardiology, if I'm not mistaken, of which he's the editor-in-chief. And it basically was a letter from the editor that was published in this, and it was from 1990. And then he put a table of the reasons why humans are herbivores and not carnivores or omnivores. And then he cited, again, this other paper, which was the first citation from the paper that Richard cited. Now let's take a look for that paper and go a little bit further. So I was very curious about this paper that he cited, especially since it was published in 1969, and clearly since then there has been thousands and thousands of papers, probably with more updated information. But nonetheless, just because something's old doesn't mean that it's not relevant. So I really wanted to read this paper that he used as his citation. I put in a search at my university library and came up with 0 hits. Then I went to PubMed and searched the same paper, also came up with 0 hits. Then I decided to just simply Google it to see if anything would come up for it, and all of the things that came up for it were the 4 things that this doctor has written and cited using this paper. Nothing original from this paper. Then I went just one step further and decided to go to Google Scholar and just do a general search for this paper again, see if anybody else cited it, to see normally if there's a paper, multiple papers will cite it, maybe we'll find some links here. No, nothing. The only things that I could find that were linked to this one paper, which was his one source for making really huge claims that humans are herbivores, were just in fact his own papers. So herein lies the first problem that we're faced with these claims. Richard is using a paper that he is deferring to the doctor's expertise in areas that he is not an expert. But if we look at what the doctor has used for his source of argument to support his claims, his argument is flimsy at best based on this. There's no evidence in my mind, looking at his paper, that supports his claim that we are herbivores. Now, he might be making very relevant claims after that about heart disease and his experience and research with cardiology, but his claim that humans are herbivores in this paper is not substantiated. And if I were to write a paper at this university and submit it for manuscript where I used a letter to the editor that I wrote and an obscure paper from 1969 that can't be found easily on an academic literature search to support my claims, I would be taken apart and picked apart for that. I would be highly criticized for my lack of academic merit in supporting my claims and arguments. I'm not really sure how medical journals work. I haven't published in medical journals, and obviously I'm not a doctor, but I'm very skeptical about the claim that humans are herbivores, and I'm going to get into that further in a subsequent video. But let's take a look at the fact and the question of, do other animals, omnivores, carnivores, get heart disease? I wanted to know, so I did some digging. Before we go any further, let's take a quick look back at the paper that Richard was citing and look at the second sentence that says, this doctor claims the only way to produce atherosclerosis in a carnivore is to take out their thyroid gland. Then, for some reason, saturated fat and cholesterol have the same effect as in herbivores. Is this a true claim? Let's take a look. So as you might imagine, you could find thousands of papers on this topic. And what I specifically wanted to find out is simply, is the statement that omnivores and carnivores do not develop arterial plaques spontaneously a true statement, as both Richard and the doctor he was quoting said? And to do this, I wanted to look at somebody's research who was very much pro-lipid hypothesis. And so I turned to Dr. Daniel Steinberg. You may know him from his book, The Cholesterol Wars. He is what I would consider a master cholesterol researcher, an absolute expert in the field. He has spent decades and decades and published hundreds of papers on his studies around cholesterol. He's very much pro-lipid hypothesis, which actually aligns with Richard's cause and claims. And he has done a lot of research on animals and arterial plaque and atherosclerosis. Now, he did research on every type of animal, from rabbits and guinea pigs all the way up to rats and dogs and primates. And what he found does hold true to somewhat of what the previous doctor was trying to make a claim for, and that's that heart disease spontaneously comes up very easily in herbivores, and it can be induced, and other animals such as carnivores like cats and dogs are more resistant to spontaneous atherosclerosis. However, he was able to, in all of his test subjects, induce atherosclerosis, and that was by simply saturating their diet with the right level of saturated fat and cholesterol to induce it in their species. Based on this initial foray into looking at heart research and animal models, I decided to look up some other papers and see if there were some different perspectives or some more information that would be valuable for my own knowledge. And what I found was some papers that talked about animal models in heart disease and studying arterial plaque said sort of similar things. This one here that recently hailed out of Vancouver said this about the carnivores. In this research, their statements and overview are about the same. They said that dogs are somewhat resistant to arterial plaques, but that it can be induced with a hypercholesterol diet, and it also can be induced by making them deficient in essential fatty acids. dogs have a mechanism by which they turn dietary cholesterol into bile acids, and there's ways for them to knock out that capacity as well. What I thought was interesting in this paper was that they did bring up cats, which you'd never think of for even any sort of modeling for heart disease, because they are the truest carnivores I think we can all think of in our minds. And they said that no, these have not been frequently used simply because they are resistant. But recently, both spontaneous and diet-induced atherosclerosis have been reported in domestic cats. This reporting of spontaneous and induced arterial plaques in domestic cats really made me wonder if we would find more about this in veterinary medicine publication. So I just did a quick search on canine heart disease, and sure enough, the first hit that comes up is showing a case study in the accumulation of advanced glycation end products, which may be of interest to some people who study those types of effects on human health. And they found that this had implications with canine atherosclerosis. So you can see here the arterial linings of these dogs' arteries are looking a lot like the clogged arteries of humans. And I thought this histology slide with the AGEs was very interesting as well, and the arrows show where the AGEs are in relation. And if we look at a little bit more data, they said that all the dogs in the study were male, and they were aged greater than 10 years. But only one of the dogs was considered overweight, and that they think that their findings show a role for AGEs in the developments of these lesions in the dogs. So I think it'll be pretty interesting to see if they do more studies on domestic dogs as to what might be happening, especially since domestic dogs are often lacking in proper exercise now, and a lot of the chow out there isn't high quality. And I'll be curious to see and read more reports and papers on this. I'll be following up. But what about omnivores? It turns out now that pigs are becoming the preferred model for studying heart disease in relation to humans. They have hearts that are almost identical to ours. Their digestive tract, their innards are almost identical to ours. And they are easier to use in research than primates, which would be the next most similar animal. But you would think as omnivores, as we're told, true omnivores cannot have heart disease like we do. However, pigs have spontaneous heart disease simply by having a high cholesterol diet. Now, moreover, they are also breeding pigs that have a genetic mutation for problems with hypercholesterol so that they can induce the lesions faster. And I'm sure they'll be doing more genetic manipulation to create the perfect research model. But in short, it turns out that pigs do in fact get atherosclerosis, and they can have it by either spontaneous occurrence or by induction. How about primates? If you dig down in literature, you will find loads of papers on heart disease in primates, especially chimps, because they're our next closest relative and everybody is curious about what they can show us about ourselves. And as you would expect, chimps in captivity show an intense sensitivity to diets that are non-native. Now in the wild, chimps eat diets that are much lower in cholesterol and much lower in saturated fats than humans, and this has been the case for over 2.5 million years. So in some ways, chimps can tell us things, but in other ways, it's questionable. The thing that I find interesting is that they have shown that chimps that are still fed a diet that is analogous to their wild diet will still show signs of heart disease, normally later in life. And researchers think this can be from a number of things. It can be from being more sedentary than their wild counterparts, being in a high-stress environment because they're captive, or who knows what the social situation is in their captivity that may be causing them stress. But there are other factors beyond their immediate diet factor that are inducing this spontaneous heart disease. I did find one paper that was able to do an autopsy on wild chimps, and they only had a sample size of 4, which is not very large. But what they found was 2 out of those 4 chimps showed signs of arterial plaque from wild living. And that goes against a lot of what we're told, that, well, if you're just eating your native diet and it's low in saturated fat and low in meat, that you're not going to have problems with arterial plaques. And that is extrapolated from a lot of research, and are saying that our next closest relatives eat this very frugivorous and vegetarian diet, and therefore we should too, and that they don't have heart disease. And we don't know that to be the case. So in closing, I just want to say that the claim that only herbivores are susceptible to heart disease and spontaneous arterial plaques is clearly wrong. The data shows otherwise. There's data from wild animals, there's data from domesticated animals, and there's data from research model animals. And I think this just goes to show a primary point that I'm trying to make with these videos, that even expert doctors in cardiology with peer published papers who are hopefully operating from a place that is not of malice, are still providing erroneous information. And it is upon us all to not use a singular paper to back up our claims, to substantiate our claims with both sides of the stories, to dig deeper into the literature, to expand our understandings, and to be willing to open our minds to data and information that doesn't align with what we think is true. And if I'm truthfully honest with myself and with others, that I, without question, in the past, have let my ideologies cloud my scientific judgment. And I think that that's why it's so important for me to continue on in my own studies, but also in doing these videos, because they're not me just trying to prove someone wrong. They're me clarifying my own misjudgments. And in the next video, I'm going to be looking at whether or not humans actually are herbivores, as said Dr. and Richard have proclaimed, what the evidence is for or against that, and whether or not we truly do have any biological adaptations through evolution that either support or don't support our consumption of animal products on a physiological level. We'll see you then. Go ahead, hit like, dislike, I don't care. Put your comments down below. What do you think? What do you think about being told something and then having it not be true? We'll see you next time.
We have made absolutely no physiological adaptations to eat meat. Meat nor any animal products are required in our diet.